My current research project I call political theology. So that's the sort of main focus of my research. So my doctoral research was in Latin American liberation theology, which I understand to be part of political theology. But in recent years, I've made a theological turn towards nature. So most of my work is focused on what I call a political theology of nature. So I've explored areas like climate change in theological perspective, and now with the arrival of the term Anthropocene, I've been doing some research in relation to that, and I'm currently involved in a consultation on astrobiology. And I'm doing this political theology of nature along two tracks, I suppose. The first is a critical track, so I'm very interested in some of the key terms that come with our discussion of ecological issues, and of particular concern to me is the concept of nature, which it seems to be we deploy in a variety of different ways, sometimes quite unhelpfully, to overly stress a strong distinction between humanity and nature. So that's the critical side. And on the constructive side, I'm developing the doctrine of creation to find ways of including non-human creatures much more forcefully in theological inquiry. And I call this a greater society of creatures, human and non-human. So that's in the area of my personal research. In terms of group research, if you like, I'm part of an ESRC funded project that's looking at Christianity and poverty. So changes in poverty in this country over the last 10 years or so. We're going to be exploring the church's reaction to that, including the provision of food banks and what have you. And as far as I know, it's the first large-scale project of its type in this area. And we're going to be doing some theological work trying to assess the religious reasons for churches undertaking this work and offering some theological commentary on that. The areas I most like to supervise in are generally in the area of applied theology, theology in contemporary society, theology and ecology. Perhaps the best way I can illustrate that is just to mention some of the PhD theses that I've supervised already. So I think over the last 20 years or so, I've supervised 20 and more postgraduate theses. And some examples are in theology and disability. So one of my research students has looked at the relationship between disability, theologies of disability, and accounts of atonement, for example. Another student has looked at post-colonial perspectives on understandings of the church in the Anglican Communion. Another's looked at the theme of human sexuality, talking about the way of holiness in the context of discussions about homosexuality in the Church of England and developing queer theological perspectives in response to that. Another area has been a student looked at homelessness in connection with the doctrine of creation and the way in which we construct homeless people as kind of passive recipients of our charity, and whether there's any kind of theological pushback on that. And I'm hoping that shortly new students will start exploring themes like technology in liberation perspectives and a theology of water. Supervising Raj has been very, very stimulating because working with him has forced me to consider what it is to do theology in my context. So I've come to the conclusion that before talking with Raj, I've made all sorts of assumptions about what it is to do theology in my context. So, of course, although it's true that the status and significance of Christianity is changing in the United Kingdom and across Europe more broadly, there's a sense in which it's embedded in the culture and has been the kind of dominant religious force in this country. But Raj's context is really quite different. So in India, a little more than 2% of people self-identify as Christian, and of course it's a post-colonial context, and I think that makes a huge difference. And of course there are issues to do with caste and the relationship of caste to class, which make the Indian context very particular and quite different. So in conversation with Raj, I've been thinking about, well, what is it to do public theology in my context when Raj is presenting me with the issues of doing public theology in his particular context. And that's forced me to be much more self-reflexive and self-aware about what it is to do theology in my context, and I'm very grateful for that. I think my top tip for a PhD student starting out would be to say that it's important to get immersed in the research culture of your department and of the school more widely. It's certainly true that one thing that we value in researchers in arts is independence, the ability to be an independent researcher. And of course, in our discipline, that tends to mean solitary work. So I think I'd want to stress another side, which is participation in seminars, participation in conferences, finding opportunities to give papers, and perhaps to go beyond that. So research students of mine associated with the Lincoln Theological Institute have organised conferences, for example. They've also been involved in editing or co-editing conference proceedings. So, establishing reading groups, being involved in discussion groups with people perhaps in other disciplines, I think all that's important. And more I begin to think that the way that we communicate expectations as regarding research is done in non-obvious and indirect ways. And I think ways of picking up the cues are involvement in the in your research culture. So that would be my recommendation for a research student starting out.
I have done a thesis on public theology, and the title of my thesis is Towards a Subaltern Public Theology for India, in which I have explored the public character of public theology from the sides of subalternity, addressing the definitional and subalternity deficiencies of public theology. I also bring in subaltern liturgy as a theological account of such a public, and has proposed that it has a contested epistemology, and therefore my public theology offers a deviant public theology to the Western public theologies, Western academic public theologies of our times today. Indeed, I am quite fortunate to work with Peter Scott, and it has been a learning experience working with Peter. I'm especially impressed by his critical perspectives, his precision of thoughts, and the way he comes out pastorally in trying to engage in conversations, in correcting my opinions, in correcting my scripts. So it has been one of the best things that had ever happened to me is to meet Peter and to work with him in this journey of research. And I can say it has been a wonderful experience working with him. I should say that the Lincoln Theological Institute of the University of Manchester had given me a scholarship to do my PhD, which has been a huge support. I mean, but for their scholarship, I would not be able to do a PhD here at the university. So I'm grateful to the Lincoln Theological Institute. And I'm also particularly the research community here at the university has been one of the strengths I saw in this journey, where we had good times sharing our perspectives with one another, and also participating in the seminars and conferences at the university through the faculty have also been very beneficial. And the resources at the library have been the best. And I also enjoyed participating in trainings like methods, methodologies, and preparation to Viva and things like that have been very helpful and very resourceful, offered by the university here. I mean, the research community at the School of Arts, Languages and Cultures has been great, because we see so many colleagues working on different perspectives and different topics, from issues in Latin America to issues in China. I mean, it is such a global presence that we see among the researchers, such critical and different perspectives and methodologies that each of them take on. So which has been a learning experience being in a research community by itself, because we share our coffee breaks together, having sipping a cup of coffee, talking about each other's theses, our progress, supporting one another. So I should say the researching community here has been one of the best that we have in the university. My top tip for the new PhD students coming into the university here would be to be open for new learnings, to be open for new perspectives, and try to make best use of the global presence here at the university. And I think being friendly and being able to be social with your supervisor and with the researching community helps a lot. And I'm sure that would be my top tip: to be open to the global presence and to be friendly with the researching community.